We start in the jungles of Costa Rica, where a budget Jesus Christ looking fella, who clearly can't perform miracles on his own crippled legs, summons a swarm of vampire bats by slicing up his hand. Then we do a flashback to 25 years earlier over in Greece, where two sickly lads develop a friendship over being so mutually poorly. But first, young Michael tells this British kid called Lucian that his name's not in fact Lucian now, but Milo, 'cause that's who he's always called the kids who occupy the bed beside him. And I promise you, I'm not making this up. Apparently, young Michael has been in this Greek hospice for years, because he has an incurable blood condition which seems to give him the power of entitled arrogance, which enables him to override people's names and shit. But suddenly, little Lucian, aka Milo 2.0, totally passes out. So Michael jumps out of bed and uses his special talents to stop his machine beeping, because it's giving him a right headache. Naturally, Dr. Nicholas's eyes light up with scholarship opportunities after seeing this kid's technical skills, and sends him off to New York to become a doctor and hone his talents and stuff. Then we flash forward to present day, where the now grown Dr. Michael Morbius shows his top totty assistant Dr. Martine Bancroft all of his new bats what he got from his trip to Costa Rica, and tells her about his super cool new plan to alter his DNA with the blood of vampire bats to totally heal his disease. 'Cause apparently he's never seen horror flicks like Spliced or The Fly, and seems to think that merging his genetics with animal genes is a super genius plan what could totally never go wrong. Naturally, she thinks he's being a right Wally, and he feels like one too after the mouse he experiments on immediately fucking dies. But magically, just a short time later, the mouse totally comes back to life, and this Morbius fella can barely restrain himself from giving her the smuggest I told you so in history. Also later, Michael goes to see his best mate, who has the same haircut as that 11th Doctor Who fella because reasons. And apparently, this is that sickly Milo kid all grown up, aka Little Lucian, who agreed to go by the random name of Milo for the rest of his life, simply because that was the bed that he was assigned to when he was young. Honestly, I'm not making this up. Anyway, Mikey boy begs Milo for some sweet funding, bro, so he can take his lab research to the next level and totally test his new miracle cure in human trials, which needs to be done ASAP because they're both dying, and neither of them have the time to be sitting around on park benches and not doing horrific unethical experiments on people and shit. So then we cut to a boat out in international waters, where Dr. Morbs insists his hot totty assistant penetrate him with a small shaft, and his scrawny chest soon starts convulsing. And before you can say, this'll end well, Dr. Bancroft later finds that Morbius fella crawling about on the ceiling, who then munches up a random merc before revealing that he's transformed into what looks like a young Danny Trejo. Bruh. I mean a human-vampire hybrid fella. But Dr. Morbius then breaks out of his cage and tears through the rest of the mercenaries by the power of dodgy CGI, and then kills a bunch more of them for shits and giggles, before waking up a little later and realising he's now randomly super jacked. Damn, perhaps I should go and suck on some veins and then maybe I can totally save $22.50 a month on gym fees. But he then comes to his senses and calls the Coast Guard to report a bunch of murders, but doesn't tell them that he's the one what did all these bad things. The next morning, Agents Stroud and Rodriguez arrive to investigate. And I use that term loosely. Whilst back in New York, Dr. Nicholas asks Milo how his pain is on a scale of 1 to 10. And the 11th Doctor Who fella hilariously says 11, because meta in-jokes, bro. Morbius then returns to his lab, where his legs seem to be dancing to a Shakin' Stevens tune what only they can hear. And with his health failing again, he races to drink some blood but chooses the budget artificial stuff, because unlike most monstrous creatures such as Dracula and Cher, he still has a form of moral conscience. LOL! Luckily, that seems to do the trick, and he tests out his new abilities primarily by doing some indoor parkour, before entering a giant tank and standing still in the middle of a bat swarm. And before you can say, holy shameless rip-off, Batman, he realises that artificial blood only keeps him stable for 6 hours, and that window is growing ever shorter. And soon he'll have to drink the red stuff, or else he'll go more feral than a Geordie girl after a Bacardi Breezer. Later, Milo finds Michael in the late stages of withdrawal, And instead of asking why the heck he's locked himself inside a glass cage and has gone so mental that he's now writing on the walls in his own juices, Milo goes and gets him a bag of blood, without even asking him there and then why his mate just randomly downed a pouch of hemoglobin. But Milo realises he totally fixed his wonky legs, and maybe he really is Jesus after all. But that selfish git won't share his miracle cure, because Mikey boy don't really want anyone else to become a living vampire fella and steal all of his glory. Or some shit. So he tells him to get out, because you totally ain't getting my miracle cure, so shut up about it already. Elsewhere, Stroud and Rodriguez speak to Bancroft about the boat incident, but she totally covers for Morbs, whilst later that night, an innocent lab assistant gets all spooked by flashing lights, before getting herself sucked dry and not in a good way. The next morning, Morbius packs up all his gear and heads out, but walks straight into the two cops who have been looking for him all night, and they reckon he don't look sick at all like he does on TV, and imply he must be some sort of benefits cheat. And so naturally they try to arrest his fraudulent ass, before he smacks them up real good and proper and runs away, whilst unironically dodging shots in slow motion like the director thinks bullet time sequence is somehow new, and hasn't been done to death for 20 years since it first appeared in The Matrix back in the day. Unfortunately though, he gets knocked off balance by sudden wind energy or something, and then gets confronted by Agent Stroud who sticks a gat in his face. And before you can say, well so what, because a gun ain't much of a threat to a super fast living vampire, we cut to the Manhattan Detention Complex, where Dr. Morbius is somehow rotting in jail, and writing about how his artificial blood will stop suppressing the violent urges within a matter of days, and the literal clock is now down to 4 hours and 22 minutes before the phony fakey blood stops working and he goes back to being an unreasonable soulless monster, aka your local job centre officer. Anyway, the two cops proceed to interrogate him, but he just says he's hungry, and then practically steals another Marvel hero's catchphrase by saying you wouldn't want to see him when he's hungry. Bruh. But he's soon visited by his lawyer, which turns out to be the still sickly Milo, who tells him not to worry because all Michael's ever done is try to help people. Except that time a few days ago where he went totally nuts and tore some poor blokes limb from limb. But other than that, he's a pretty decent fella. LOL! But Milo says he'll totally help him, before pulling out a fat blood bag from his pocket and leaving it on the bench. Cause security clearly didn't search him well enough before letting him in. Seriously, he could have just given the violent suspect about to be charged with murder a giant knife and all sorts. But the supposedly sickly Milo leaves his stick behind, and then does a Kaiser Soze by starting to walk normally. And Morbius soon realises that his mate must have sneaked back into his lab off screen and stolen some of his secret serum also off screen. So Morbius chugs a juicy bag of blood, escapes the prison and chases after that floppy mophead, before confronting him in the street about stealing his personal property to become a supervillain and shit. Anyway, he says I just didn't want to die, bro, before accusing Michael of being super boring and now just wants to go and have some fun. So naturally, he's so giddy with his newfound powers that he's literally bouncing off the walls, before stopping to snack on some pesky cops and then totally charging at Michael, who suddenly conjures the powers of Neo, and thereby ripping off the Matrix yet again by getting so in touch with his senses that he can suddenly use the energetic waves of reality to fly around and shit. The next day, Michael tells that Bancroft bird all about what's happened, but naturally, she's pretty scared of the idea of hanging around a mythological monster, so decides to test him via a super sneaky plot of placing a cup of coffee for him to pick up in the middle of direct sunlight. But he just scoffs, and says he's totally not that kind of pussy old creature that gets burned in the sun like those ones from Buffy or Michael Jackson and shit. Conveniently, two thugs tried to defraud a cashier with fake money behind him, so he tracks them back to their hideout and tells them to get out already. Naturally, the big boss refuses, so Morbius breaks all the bones in his hands and then bizarrely says his name is Venom. Again, not a joke. Elsewhere, we catch up with the main bad guy to kill a bit of the runtime. And look, the vampire blood has made Milo get super jacked as well, and has also given him the power of cringy dancing. So then he goes out on the town, before getting into some beef and attacking some blokes because they wouldn't do shots with him. Or some shit. Elsewhere, Agent Stroud and his Ponzi Specky sidekick check out Dr. Bancroft's flat, and Rodriguez seems to be so hungry that he shakes her cat's litter tray to see if there's any chocolate nuggets left. But she's now over at Mikey's new gaff, and totally asks him how does it feel when you're on the red. Though when I asked my girlfriend that, she just gave me a slap and said stop being such a misogynist.
Bruh.
Turns out that Martine bird meant the human blood, and he says that when he drinks the stuff, something primal wakes up inside him. Oh, just like me after 2 cans of Monsters, son. Anyway, they proceed to snog on a roof, whilst Milo watches them across the buildings like a right creepy weirdo. Always one step behind, Stroud watches CCTV of the bar attack, and only now realises that there's a second vampire on the loose.
No!
Whilst Dr. Nicholas visits a crazed Milo, and after hilariously insisting that there's to be no more violence, Milo guts the poor fella and then throws him across the room, because he's super paranoid and jealous about Michael being his favourite and shit. Meanwhile, Morbius prepares for the final battle by making some vials of poison shots, including one for himself after it's all finished, because his tolerance to artificial blood is waning, and he don't really want to go back to munching up hairy mercs on random boats. But he then gets a call from his mentor, Dr. Nicholas, who tells him he went to see Milo, who then proceeded to slice him up like a common hog, and he gets there just in the nick of time. Before his pseudo-daddy dies without even telling Michael that he loves him, and before you can say, of all the Jareds to kill off in this scene, why did it have to be the good one? He uses his echolocation ability to locate his kidnapped floozy, but alas, it's too late to save her, and it looks like it's curtains for the #1 pointless love interest who made zero impact on the plot or audience. Well, that is until he tries to molest her corpse by giving her a goodbye hickey. But suddenly Milo turns up, and they soon have a Man of Steel type aerial battle and smashing into innocent buildings and shit. Anyway, after enduring some more slow-mo fight scenes what are so dark no fucker can even tell what's going on anymore, Morbius ends up stuck upside down on a bar like a right cuck. So he then lets out a girly scream what summons his pet bats, which somehow seem to be able to heal him because reasons. And he makes them all swarm his arch frenemy before poking him in the nipple with his poison vial. And Milo just can't believe that his once best friend would straight up murder him like that despite him doing all these bad things. And then says, you even gave me that phony fakey name, bro. And so Morbius calls him by his original name before telling that Lucian bloke to shut up and die already. Morbius then flies out of the ground and straight past those pointless loser cops who totally failed to stop anyone from killing or dying. And then Martine wakes up with blood red eyes and is presumably super pissed at having been molested post-death by a smelly Jesus cosplayer. Though he did technically bring her back to life, I suppose. And we end on Sir Michael of the Morbius riding on the wave of some bats, before we cut to the super funky techno end credits, which totally look like they belong in a Tron flick rather than a vampire superhero film. And that's it. That's the movie. Though there are 2 post-credit scenes which involve the Spider-Man villain Vulture randomly appearing and approaching Morbius to do a trucy team-up, but they're literally the worst end credit scenes in Marvel history, so I can't even be asked to acknowledge them. Though my favourite part was where the main baddie achieves his narrative goal completely off-screen. And also all the shameless rip-offs the director does, by including various Batswarm sequences from Batman Begins, and even seeming to shamelessly use Hans Zimmer's musical score for those scenes. But anyway, that's the plot and that's your lot. Consider ringing that bell thing so you don't miss any future recaps. Tell me if you like this flick in the comments if you have time. And I'll be seeing you in the next one.